Hello, this is the first time I'm making a video, so this will be very crusty. I just wanted to take some time to thoroughly discuss POE2. First off, I'm not against the fact that they wanted to do something different. I just don't think the implementation or the way they went about it was exactly the best for the game. I also apologize for this video being pretty late. I had to get a lot of recording and try to think how I'm going to structure this correctly without veering off too much and making this a very long video because I don't want to waste your time. I'll start off by providing a little bit of background with my experience with PoE. On Steam, I have over 5,000 hours logged on PoE1, and on PoE2 I have over 200 hours logged. For PoE1, I mainly play in Standard League, but I play it like it's SSF. I enjoy just making my own build and doing my own thing. I have tried trading before, but I just didn't find it as enjoyable as doing SSF. I've tried build guides, but I found it more enjoyable just scrapping up my own thing and really looking at the systems and making them come together. I usually take about minimum 3 days to complete acts. Never done completely juiced content with layers of delirium. Never done a simulacrum all the way. Never done Ubers. The furthest I've gotten was on a Val Domination Guardian. I killed Maven for the first time and Uber Elder for the first time. All of that was in Crucible League. This previous league in PoE1, I wanted to go Sabo Icicle Mine because of the new Sabo node that gave lucky crit and unlucky damage. However, I wasn't liking Icicle Mine, so I just switched over to Explosive Trap. I was going to use Machuatl's Machination, but the Val change for my purposes made it impossible to use. So I decided to go dual wield Fate of the Val with Spectral Helix of Charthus, but never got to finish that. For PoE2, most of my experience has been playing Monk and testing things out and seeing what works and what doesn't and why it feels so off. So I want to begin with a misconception some people have with PoE1. People think that PoE2, once it gets the amount of content PoE1 has, things will work. I don't think that's the case. PoE1 isn't great because it has a lot of content. You don't do the content because there's content. That doesn't make sense. You know, it's not self-fulfilling. That doesn't... You don't do the content to do the content. The content doesn't solve the content. In reality, it's the RPG mechanics that you can use in a large amount of ways to solve that content. The content is merely a way for you to use the RPG mechanics to solve a problem. And the RPG mechanics are set up in such a way to where it's kind of modular and you can combine it in different ways. That's why PoE1 is so good and why you play it and do the same thing over and over and over again. It's the RPG mechanics and chiseling away at your build, getting the number up bit by bit. Now I'm going to mention something that some of y'all might be triggered by. Arch Nemesis. So the reason why Arch Nemesis didn't work is because the numbers in combat that the enemies have has a very special purpose. It's how you, the developer, are able to tell us, the player, if our build is meeting certain stat milestones and that we are progressing our build adequately. Those numbers are not for difficulty per se, because if it was for difficulty, we would be able to engage with it with lower numbers, but that is not the case. And since the game has a big emphasis on RPG mechanics, the combat's very simple. Enemies have different attacks, sure, but the underlying AI is simple because it has a purpose, and that's to make sure the player's progressing, make sure that their gear is progressing and their build. And that's why Arch Nemesis didn't work, because those numbers, you pumped them up, gave enemies these huge stat increases, but all that does is narrow what passes that check you're giving the player. It does not per se raise difficulty. That is, I think, a misconception. That is not how difficulty works. If you want something to be more difficult in combat, you have to completely fundamentally change the AI to react to the player better, to react to moves, to have better tactical display in combat. However, since the game is heavily instanced on a server, I'm not sure how which side exactly does the calculations for the enemy AI, but I'm pretty sure it's server side, so it would significantly take up more server space, and so I don't see how that's viable. In essence, what you want to do, the things you would have to do to actually facilitate it in terms of making combat more thought-provoking, you're kind of limited with the infrastructure and just the medium that you have. I mean, top-down games aren't exactly known for their engaging combat. A lot of times, more tactical games, the view is drawn out more. And whenever you were talking about Arch Nemesis, you said, oh, we want sometimes people to see these rares that, oh no, do I engage with this rare? That's hard to say whenever we barely even get any heads up notice on what's in front of us, because we only get a certain perspective of view of the battlefield, and that's enemy aggro range pretty much. So it didn't make sense to me that you were making that kind of argument. And so in POE2 now, I run into the issue of, like, a normal enemy with no modifiers takes quite a while to kill. And that becomes less of engaging and more of tedium. And I ask myself, so what am I doing? I feel like in wanting to slow down the player, you listed out ways you could do that, and then you went with all of the things instead of just picking one thing, seeing how it was, and going with it. You decided, let's do all of these at once. And so it creates this superposition of just running into a brick wall. Let's imagine combat is a conversation. Whenever I'm in combat with the enemy, I feel like I'm having a conversation with a brick wall. In essence, in POE2, I'm essentially approaching combat the same way I do in POE1, i.e., I'm doing the same thing in combat over and over. It's just now I have 5 different steps that I'm doing, or like at most 5 different steps. And at first it's okay, but then it just wears real thin eventually. And there's times where I feel like I'm getting stuck on the enemy more than I ever got stuck on terrain in POE1. Like, you have the enemy swarm me, but I'm slower than before. You've slowed down the player, but you didn't slow down the enemy in a lot of areas, and the enemy is the same speed as it was, and it has the same simple logic, so I'm just getting swarmed by an enemy that doesn't really have any thought behind it other than where I am in relation to them. And I get there was more work done on how the enemy paths and whatnot, but I'm just saying, it seems and it appears, it feels like the enemy is pretty similar in what it does fundamentally in POE2 as it did in POE1. Not only that, I'm running into the collision boxes of these enemies, and I'm like, huh, man, like, we're collision boxes this large in PoE1? And I was playing the recent league for PoE1, and no, the collision boxes for enemies in this game are much. It's like a force field almost around the enemy. It's weird. I think maybe you did that because of how swarming works, and you want the player to be overwhelmed and swarmed, but instead it's like I have a bunch of concrete pylons. And not only that, it's also the tiny enemies that have this. And so it just creates such a janky and confusing experience. And it makes it so inconsistent with how larger enemies can just shove me around like crazy. But when it comes to me and smaller enemies, these ankle biters are all of a sudden just a concrete pylon that I can't get past, and I have to roll. I feel like at some point the roll was something more tactical, but since things are more janky now and the enemy overwhelms you constantly, it's now, okay, roll is now pretty much a baseline defense, up there with armor, evasion, and energy shield. Like, as a monk with melee strike, I'm rolling constantly, in and out. I have to roll constantly to avoid just the hwacha fire of projectiles from the back line, and I can't get through the front line. In order to get to the back line, I have to go around it. And so the experience is less smooth combat and more janky combat. I feel like that is just stemming from how do we slow down the player, and not, okay, how do we have the player flow through combat, make combat flow better. It's more, what are ways we can slow down the player? But to be honest, just slowing us down by limiting the amount of movement speed is enough. You don't have to go even further with that. And since now it's not, get to the unique at the end when it comes to maps, it's find all the rares. You don't have to slow down the player now like you did in PoE1 when you had to limit the dashes and completely change them because people were just dashing to the end of the map, skipping everything. So I continually run into this issue where things are almost like they didn't learn from the lessons in PoE1, and it didn't change things to accommodate for the changes it's made compared to PoE1. And even then, there's some problems I run into and some giant roadblocks I run into that PoE1 already had a solution for, and it just, I guess you have some quote-unquote solutions, but they're more pseudo-solutions. They don't actually solve the problem. Like with rune sockets. Rune sockets do not provide enough value to actually fill in gaps in gear. A lot of times, I roll gear with a gap in it, and I have some free affixes, free affix slots. I exalt orb. Oh no, I didn't get the correct resistances or health I needed. So now what do I do? Well, I can either slam chaos orbs on it and have terrible statistics of a chance to actually get what I need, or I just build up a ton of base, the same base item type, and throw it in the recombinator bench and hope something comes out with something, you know? It's completely random. And it's almost like those are endgame statistics, you know? That's what I should be doing. Endgame, to just be getting those slight increases on my build to really squeeze the most out I can, but I'm doing that before I even get to maps, early maps. And so not only did you narrow margins for the content, you also made it very difficult to actually meet the demands of the content. Like, would it hurt to just put in a crafting bench? Just a simple crafting bench. You do not need any of the meta crafting. I'm fine with there being no meta crafting, but I need like 25 elemental resistance, not all elemental resistance, but a element resistance, like 25 in a gap in order to fill in a lot of these gaps. Because a lot of times I just roll a single digit resistance, a very low tier on a level 60 item, and that's ridiculous. I shouldn't have to do that. Like, the statistics, I could show you the statistics. I did calculate the statistics it would take for me to get a 25% fire resistance at least on an item if I were to Chaos Orb it with full affixes. If you do the math, for a level 65 item, it's like 0.6 something percent. Or no, it's actually, I think 0.9%. Yes, 0.91%. I got the amount of potential modifiers you can get on a body armor from POE2 DB. But for a level 65 item, if I put a Chaos Orb on a fully affixed item, and there's only one modifier I want to change on it, and the potential for that to be at least 25 resistance, not to mention that the one that it rolls with 25 is a range that has a minimum value of like 20, so I would have to div orb if I got that, but for simplicity's sake, it comes out to 0.91% chance to fill that gap in resistances. That is end game statistics. That shouldn't be what I'm doing pre-maps. And so what I'm trying to argue here is the crafting bench was a solution POE1 came up with, and it's about the only good solution for this. I mean, you could argue, oh, why don't you just trade? We brought down the barriers for trading. I still don't want to trade. I like engaging in the systems that the game provides. Just because there's more barriers down, doesn't mean I want to still engage in it. But then for Exalt Orb, I forgot to mention, I mentioned that the statistics for a Chaos Orb. So let's say we have 5 affixes, 1 suffix that's open. Well, for an Exalt Orb on an item like that, it would be to get fire resistance at a minimum of 25%, about 5.36%. Again, that's not too bad, but on the, let's say, 94.64% that I don't get it, I then have to do the 0.91%. And you might be saying, oh wait, what about splinters? Well, splinters, I can't necessarily farm those pre-maps, can I? And if I need to reach a certain threshold when going into maps to be able to do the content, and I can't meet those in order to get the splinters for the guaranteed, magic item with a guaranteed modifier, well, I just can't get that, can I? So, to say again, I feel like I'm running into issues that POE1 already had a solution for, and at times it almost feels like you're just trying to make this as different as POE1 as you possibly can. However, POE1 is tried and tested. There's a reason why it's looked at as the ARPG in modern times. It has gone through trials and tribulations, and the successes of what PoE did right in a lot of cases should not be ignored. Now, I will say this game did some things better, as in simplifying a lot of calculations, but then whenever you overcomplicate other things, it just becomes so weird. Why would you simplify things just to also overcomplicate them? And this overcomplication is kind of making build diversity just that much worse. So in POE1, there was skill gems that did facilitate some level of comboing. Same thing with support gems. There were some support gems that would require you to combo with another skill. The issue with how it's implemented in POE2 is now you've fleshed that out more to where it's now invaded into the purpose of both skill gems and support gems. I would argue that fleshing it out more would require it to take it out of skill gems and support gems and then put it in its own separate thing that is parallel to skill gems and support gems. So the purpose of skill gems and support gems is retained. So there's something you could do is like a synergy tree or a synergy gem. For the synergy gem, you could have 2 open sockets that you just have pointers to existing gems you have socketed. And then the skills will interact in the way the gem dictates. Like, for example, orbs interact with poison. Okay, let me put in this orb skill, and then let me put in this other skill that'll facilitate the poison. Or you could do the synergy tree. The synergy tree would be something similar, except it would be nodes that we allocate into. And so it would be more of a global thing rather than just an isolated thing. Because a lot of times I've asked myself, so why is this not a global thing? Like, let's say, Plague Burst. Well, I'm only ever going to apply poison majorly with one skill. The skill that does the most damage that applies poison is going to take precedence. So, why? It doesn't make sense to me. Why it's only relegated to a single skill, a single support gem in a skill. I ask myself, just why isn't this global? And another issue with how skill gems and support gems are implemented in POE2 is there's now invisible lines. Base values are very rare and are very they're precious. They're on items, and that we don't have much agency over that. So skill gems, a lot of them have built-in base values, like knockback or freeze. And because of this, it makes these skills have invisible connections to them, invisible lines connecting them. And so now when a player looks at a skill, they gotta now map out these invisible lines because it's not presented as with these lines. It's only presented with tiers, which is it makes it just more dizzying looking at and trying to sift through all this. And because a lot of these skills have base values built into them, you can't really mix and match for a lot of these combos. Not only that, I look at support gems and it just looks so messy. It's not very organized. It's just, tiers. I gotta have rejects. But just looking at it at a surface level, it's just like, it's like fruity pebbles. How am I supposed to be able to distinguish one from another out of the group? And then I saw the added, like, attack speed 1, 2, and 3. And then I look at attack speed 2 to attack speed 3, and I'm like, wow, attack speed 3 has a big jump up in the positive, but an incredible jump in the negative drawbacks. Like, I have additive attack speed increase, but a multiplicative damage decrease, 50% less. I feel like attack speed in this game just isn't good for you. Like, if you were better off just doing hit hard once and walk away. The more time you spend attacking the enemy, the less likely you are to survive. And because of how elemental ailments work now, the more you attack, like little pellets of attacks don't do much. You need one hard hit, pretty much. Except for Ignite now, because there's flammability. So let me begin to talk about what my experience was with the campaign this time around this league. So Acts 1 through 3 were pretty easy this time around. Like, the bosses were just... Mervale takes longer to kill than the Acts 1 through 3 bosses in POE2 did this time around. It was really odd. And then getting into Act 4, it was alright. And then when you start coming up against the Karui base type enemies is when the numbers start getting pretty silly again. And then going into Heart of the Tribe, the ground effect spam becomes silly also. And then in the prologue, it gets very inconsistent. Like, you start in one area, you get dumpstered. The next, completely fine. Completely okay. Nothing. Your build works. It's good. And then the next part of the prologue, dumpstered. Next area, okay. Next part, dumpstered. And that's the third time that happens. I get kind of like, I'm like, okay, I'm done. That's enough for me. And so I started farming the area just for items, and so I could sell them, get gold, and respec and demonstrate. So this works, this doesn't. So I'll go into the build that I had for the campaign and I decided to go for. I went Acolyte of Chayula and I used Ice Strike. And I used Embitter so I can get that chaos damage to actually be useful as a monk. And I put in attack speed 2 so I could get the 2 first attacks in the combo out faster, and then I have the crescendo end of it. So, or actually, no, it wasn't attack speed 2, it was crescendo 2. My bad. It was crescendo 2, and I took that, and I also had the increase or more freeze build-up support also, and then mana leech so I could actually sustain that. And some areas it worked, other areas it didn't in the prologue. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to do this as best as I can. I had catharsis, right, on Shattering Palm, so in combat I can actually consume some of my volatility stacks and not have to wait 4 seconds, so I could actually get that damage in the middle of combat and keep momentum up. And when I got to this cliff area, the cliff area in part 3 of the prologue, I could not. The ailment thresholds were so much, I could not sustain my mana. Or, well, the leech thresholds also. The leech resistant was higher than 1, a ratio of 1. So I couldn't leech the amount my leech was saying, and I could sustain it. Not only that, I had to take catharsis off because I couldn't even build up to 20 stacks of volatility in order to use Shattering Palm to get my damage. And so I had to rely heavily on Shattering Palm for the damage in this area. And, you know, the build just starts falling apart because ailment thresholds became too high for me, apparently. And not to mention how hard a lot of these enemies in this area hit. Which, I mean, the pretty much all the starting areas of the prologues, the first area you go to outside of the encampment that you first spawn into for the section of the prologue, all those enemies, the numbers are pretty high, and then the next area after that is always fine. I'm not sure what's up with that, but the thing is like a lot of these other builds I tried out, I did a spellcaster, right? And I kept the defenses the same, completely fine the entire time. I'm not struggling. I'm not getting hit a ton because I'm at ranged. I could stay at range. I don't have to be next to the enemy, and I can still maneuver as I'm attacking. And it just it's like, okay, well, why do I even play melee strike at this point? And that's what I was referring to when I said rolling becomes almost like a main defense up there with armor and etc. Because at melee strike range, you have to roll constantly because you're always taking attacks. Whereas if I'm ranged, I don't really have to do that. I like also rolling. If I go gas grenade, it just roll. The gas grenade does all of it, and I barely get hit because I'm just constantly rolling, and as soon as I pop back up, I just boom, boom, and it just and I just just roll. And you hit survivability increases dramatically, but I'm not really doing much of anything. I'm just constantly rolling. It becomes very tedious and boring. But you added a new defensive layer, deflection, which, I mean, it's a step in the right direction for evasion, energy shield hybrids, and evasion in general, but the fact that it's scaling with evasion makes it useless for monk, which is evasion energy shield. And it's kind of weird that we're taking a defensive layer and making it scale with a defensive layer. It's one step forward, two steps back. It fixes a problem. It's a solution, but it doesn't fix the entire problem. It's just partly so. And I feel like a lot of times, like, just getting a little bit of some defenses in this game is not as good as it was in POE1. Like, I eventually at some point, I'm doing default attack and I'm doing a poison popcorn loop just with the default attack, and I'm taking armor scavenger, just having the poison break the armor, scavenge that armor, more armor, and I have armor on, I picked up some armor bases that had armor on it, and I still get hit like a truck, Usually, even having a little bit of armor in POE1 in maps, when you got it later in, was very good and really shored up your defenses. But I think another issue is also there's no guard skill anymore. And I'm not saying, put in a guard skill. I'm just saying there's this now giant hole, and it needs something, It needs to be... I'm feeling like there's not enough time being given to refine these things. I really think sticking to a very tight league schedule for the game in its current state is not the best. And what will happen eventually is all these little things will kind of get forgotten and left by the wayside as new leagues come out, and then we gotta readjust things in the league. We gotta readjust this and that, bug fixes. And, the little details become, they get left behind and forgotten about, and just little things that need to be done in order to improve the experience all around. And I really worry about the potential of burnout when it comes to that, because if things are really tight and people aren't feeling like they're able to completely get things done, and then when they come out with things and then people are having issues, that's disheartening. It's like, we worked so hard on this. And I worry about, as that continues, as that keeps going on, like, that just builds up, and I worry about that. I really do. But anyways, moving on to the next thing I wanted to talk about. So Acolyte Chayula is in this weird position. Ever since early access release, I've asked myself, so how is this a monk? Well, what I've found out is there's two ways to play Acolyte Chayula. Completely just not even building around the Ascendancy nose and playing monk or going poison. Or just if you want to actually build around Acolyte Chayula, just off-class it. And I think the biggest issue is the fact that there's no main skill attack for Chaos, for Acolyte Chayula, for Monk. And it puts it in this weird place. Now, there's the namesake Hand of Chayula, but Hand of Chayula is more of it's a utility, I'd say. It's less of a main skill and more of a utility. And I've actually tried in early access to make that work like a Hex Blast sort of thing, and I just couldn't get it to work well. And so I just dropped that whole thing. But yeah, it's most of the mostly if you have a skill that hits hard, what is it, lightning drop or whatever, the lightning slam that you have that expends power charges. If you just build around and just pump power charges, you don't even have to worry about your ascendancy even. It's good. You just take a charged dash or whatever it's called. I forget what it's called, but you do that, and when you do a perfect strike with it, you then get shock ground, exposure. You socket that in as a support, and then you do the palm, consume the shock, and then you get a power charge, and you just do that and have all those power charge nodes. That's have a chance to get max power charge. Consume a power charge, it counts as double or something, or one extra. And you just do that, roll around, and then boom, and you clear the whole area pretty much. And I found success with that, but it has nothing to do with Acolyte Chayula. It's just the skill in and of itself, and the nodes are good and efficient to allocate, that I don't have to worry about it. And that's one thing about the passive tree, is it feels like it's also way too efficient to spec into stuff. It feels very linear compared to Path 1. Path 1, I have to really think whenever I allocate stuff. In this game, I'm like, okay, I see the path. Okay, let me... poison on Monk is just it's so easy to path that out. It's just the bottom. I just do that. And another thing about the monk area, there's a lot of attack speed. You know, there's a lot of attack speed nodes, increased attack speed. Is, but you know, you can only get so much out of it because it's additive increase. It's not multiplicative. It's not base. It's just a ton of additive. And so, I mean, it's good in that you don't have to spec into all of it, but there's not much variety in that. Oh god, I'm digressing, aren't I? Anyways, going back to what I was talking about defenses, I then was like, okay, what about if I do shield charge, poison, popcorn? Let's see how that is on monk. And as soon as I put a shield on, I notice, oh my god, I can actually take hits. Like, I know layering defenses is good, block is really good. Just in general, even in POE1, it makes you a lot tankier than not going block, but still, it's like, oh my god. I get like over 20% block, just not even allocating into block. And just tanky. I start being able to take way more hits, and I'm like, oh wow. Huh. That's interesting. And I get there's also a base quarterstaff with block, but then so I need block in order to live or something. So I need to go that one in order to live and actually be able to not just get deleted. And, you know, I was thinking maybe it's my EHP, effective hit pool. Maybe it's that. And I tried just going all of the defensive nodes on the monk side, and it still didn't really do much, and I didn't really get much deflection either from that. And so I'm like, oh gosh. So I do no damage, and I still get my butt beat. Gosh. Dang it. And then I try the recoup, but recoup's not fast enough for the amount that enemies hit you and the amount that they chunk. So that doesn't really work either. And then Leech. Like, Leech is in such a weird spot. The formula for Leech, the calculations, are simplified, but then it's complicated to the point where, only physical attacks can Leech. And I just get confused by that, because I'm like, why? And I'm wondering if it's not just because, the item affects physical damage Leech. Physical attack damage Leech. Because I looked it up, and I tried to find, like, what people were talking about it, and people were, for some reason, bringing spell Leech into the conversation. I'm like, no, we're talking about attack Leech here. We're just talking about attacks. We're not talking about spell. I'm fine with that. They have enough regen. They have Arcane Surge. What? What about attacks? Why can't I just Leech with an attack? And it's just weird that only physical. And, like, I don't know the argument for it, because you have to put, like, keystones. So the majority of monk spells are elemental. So, if you just want to leech mana as a monk, take that keystone. And it's like, okay, so I have to take the keystone in order to work as a build. It's just a function, basically, and it's weird. Because monk is all about being in the middle of combat, having momentum in combat, and flowing through combat, attacking. It's really weird whenever, you can't leech. Leech was the best way to stay in combat like that. And then you just break a ton of the momentum of combat, and that all that disengaging is like, it's not engaging. It's like, I have to pull back. It's just tiring, because there's not much tactics to the AI to make it interesting, to make it thought-provoking. It just guns for you. And then just relentlessly goes at you. And it's, oh, you're getting overwhelmed. I just... It's like... Eh. But back to Leech. And then there's... Oh, if you want to leech with this damage, we put this in this ascendancy. It's like, why? Like, I don't get it. Like, oh, if you want to leech with chaos attack damage as a Acolyte Chayula, just take this note. And I'm like, oh, you mean the chaos damage I don't really have, and it's tied behind a whole bunch of extra chaos damage? That one? And no, there's no base chaos damage quarterstaff, and you can't roll it as an affix. The only way to get it is as a corrupted implicit or a socketed implicit through the runecraft and or rune socket, which whatever it's called. And I find it so weird why like the thing that the ascendancy is made around the damage type chaos damage, it's all behind extra chaos damage, but the main issue with that is damage calculations don't work like they used to, like in POE1. So it's so hard to actually utilize that extra chaos damage. Like, you have to, like, yeah, you could do increased attack damage nodes, but those nodes have, like, dazed, blind, and stuff like that. It has nothing to do with Acolyte Chayula. But you have to choose, other than that, to do no damage with just a base level and build up the chaos extra damage, and then wait for all of them to align because they all have independent timers for all these different sources of extra chaos damage. And it's like, oh boy. It's like almost impossible to actually use a monk, or Acolyte Chayula, use it as a monk and be able to use chaos damage for it. It's just so silly. I won't go any further into the notation, and I'll warn you when I do and give you a timestamp to skip, or if I don't do that on accident because I forgot because I'm an idiot, just go to the most watch area right after this. I guarantee you it'll get you where you want to go. Okay, so for volatility, let's assume we have a minimum of 20 and a maximum of 100. Minimum of 20 because of catharsis, because catharsis requires a minimum of 20 in order to consume volatility stacks using it. However, in order to get to like 100, we need to either build that up over time, which is very hard. So you usually do that with catharsis, and we're using, of course, monk skills in this example. We're not using incinerate. That's yes, you're gonna reach big numbers with that, but I'm trying to show why it doesn't make sense as a monk. So not easy to consistently reach 100 or even close to 70 unless you're using spells or get lucky with 20% chance to not consume volatility from the passive tree and have catharsis. So let's assume we have 60 volatility that we have consumed. So keep in mind, if you reach those kind of numbers, you probably already killed everything. And then by the time you reach the next pack, the buff will have already worn off, or you would have just used it on a single enemy. So, Mantra of Destruction converts 67 damage to extra chaos. Don't know why I said convert in this, but anyways, level 16. Max gem level has 69%. I'll use 70 to be generous. I'm ignoring purple flame aspect of this. Purple flame, I think, is moot to this example because you're only ever going to be able to use the maximum amount for like a second. There's so many timing things that you have to do, so it's just gonna overcomplicate things. I'm not gonna use it in this example. So it'll only add the issue of inconsistency even more, blah blah blah. This I'm just showing what I'm doing. So Mantra of Destruction needs 8 to activate. So we have 9 times 120 chaos. The reason why is because we have 120 chaos from volatility, right? So we have 8 attacks to build it up, and then the empowered attack from Mantra of Destruction. So that's 1 attack while Mantra is active, and then we have the Mantra buff. And so that's 8 plus 1 times 120. And then we have plus 140 damage. And then we divide by the total number of attacks we used. 8 combo building, 1 empowered. And then before damage increases, this is what we get on average. So, Ice Strike. I'm gonna now show mathematically how the way that I set this up, it is the most effective way to do it as a monk. And it still didn't work. So with Mantra of Destruction, yada yada yada, yap yap yap. And then, okay, we get this. But then, with Embitter, oh wow, look. And then, okay, if we want our chaos damage to contribute to freeze buildup, now this is important, we need to take Unraveling. However, our chaos damage will still not contribute to chill. Because Unraveling doesn't state that. Thus, only cold damage will contribute to chill. So, thus, it will not help building up volatility from inner turmoil. So, thus, we have 3 possible outcomes for Unraveling. We desire one of those, because spreading out your ailment magnitude, like, oh, you need to focus on an ailment. You can't just spread it out like that in order to do it effectively. So we desire one of those. So we have 1 out of 3. It lasts 2 seconds. So let's begin with a 6-second period. The probability we will have chaos contribute to freeze buildup for 6 seconds is a probability of 1/27. That's 3.7% of the time. Now that's probability. It may not even happen. This probability will be the same for any one of the ailments we choose from Unraveling. We only choose one because it's not optimal to spread ailment magnitudes with how high ailment thresholds are late game. Okay? And it's not reasonable to expect to have a skill with supports for each ailment magnitude on it that you can have, so you can effectively just use a rolled ailment with chaos damage dealt for only a 2-second period. So let's take these 2 examples and let's try to see what increases we need. And I already explained, chaos and cold need to be the same in order for the 2 of these to match up and do the same amount of damage. Now remember, Our chaos does not contribute to freeze all the time, only for 2-second periods. Volatility requires us to build up, then wait 4 seconds. Unless we have an attack skill supported by Catharsis, but that only explodes a random amount of volatility. Then we have the extra damage for 10 seconds. And every time you consume a stack with Catharsis, that has an independent timer. So, good luck. So, 10 seconds for 60 extra chaos damage and need unraveling to pick freeze magnitude 5 times in a row over those 10 seconds, which is a probability of 1/3 to the power of 5, and that's 1 out of 243. 1 out of 243 chance to have 10 seconds of chaos damage contributing to freeze buildup, whereas if we use Embitter, we get a guaranteed 10 seconds. So, we have to use freeze and cold out of the choices, because it's the only one that allows you to convert our chaos damage into something reliable and usable. But it requires a support gem slot. This is more complicated in-game, and I would argue averages worse numbers, and is way more inconsistent. So, since we have so much extra chaos damage, you might be thinking, well, why don't we just build around the extra chaos damage and then pump it increases, dude? Obviously, that should work. Okay, so our only reliable source of chaos damage as a monk is to get extra chaos damage, or we get base chaos damage from a corrupted implicit on a piece of gear. You cannot roll a affix for that. It just doesn't exist. Or there's also a soul vial that gives you extra chaos damage, or base chaos damage, if you socket it in. So here, I looked at every possible extra chaos damage node, and I took all of those. Okay, sources of increased chaos damage, did all of them. All of the ones on the tree. Even, I didn't consider if you could legitimately path to them, mind you. I just took all of them, period. So, base damage, physical. We're using Ice Strike because I was using Ice Strike. So, here, damage conversion matrix. Okay, step 2 conversion. We don't have any, so it's step 2 conversion is just the same as is, and then this is the extra damage as step 2 extra. Increased damage step. We have all of this pumped into chaos increase. Base damage matrix, or base damage vector, sorry, times conversion 1 plus extra 1 matrix. Now, mind you, step 1 conversion and extra do not happen simultaneously. So if you have step 1 conversion, you then put step 1 extra over to step 2. If you have step 1 extra, then you won't have step 1 conversion, so on and so forth. Okay, and so here we have base damage, matrix, then blah 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 blah. Yes, this is overkill for this simple example, but I was messing around with linear algebra notation for this, just because. And so we have the step 1 matrix, which is step 1 conversion. Or no, this is step 2. This was step 1. My bad. I'm really bumbling this, huh? So step 2 conversion. Step 2 conversion is the identity matrix, so it's all 1. And then we have the extra damage added. Extra damage. So we have this, and then we get that, and then increases applied. So this is what we get at the end. So we get this. Now, mind you, going up, this is what we get with catharsis. Even with the increase pumping into the extra chaos damage, because we have no base chaos damage, all those increases we're taking at a certain point, they plateau and bottle out. It just becomes less efficient the more increases you take, because of how this equation works. You see? Okay, and then here's where I talk about, okay, base chaos damage. Where can we get that? Okay, socket. You get soul core of foulness or corrupted implicit. So, to be generous, I'll give it the maximum potential roll of those ranges. So, we average out to 44.5 base damage, chaos, added damage, total base damage. Okay, the following. Same math as last example, except you see now, oh wait, we're doing damage all of a sudden. Wow, who would have thought? Who would have thought giving us base damage of a type will end up giving us more of that type in the end and be better than just taking extra damage. So I won't go into this, but here's my question. Why is Acolyta Chaiula a monk ascendancy? I look at it and I go, how is this a monk? I look at the monk skills and I go, okay, here's Handa Chaiula. Acolyta Chaiula sure has to deal with chaos damage, but Handa Chaiula is in a main chaos attack skill. It doesn't work like that. And plus, it's more utility. You have Mark and a Mark and a curse that you could apply at once, but there's nothing in Acolyta Chaiula that deals with actual curses or marks. So I get very confused. Like, it's okay for a ascendancy to have some off-classing capabilities. That's great. But a ascendancy needs to be able to function as its base class effectively, first and foremost, and then within those nodes provide some sort of off-classing, like there is currently with the keystone that lets you convert fire to chaos damage. That one's great, but that's like the only way to make Acolyta Chaiula work. And when it's the only way to make it work, I question why it's a monk at that point. Like, why isn't this a witch or a sorceress? You know, because if it doesn't function within its base class, what sense does it make to have it as that base class? It could easily go into any other class at that point if it can't even function as its base class. And so I feel like Acolyta Chaiula has like a very serious identity crisis. Okay, so I've wasted enough of your time, and so what I'm just gonna do is I'm not gonna go over this. I'm just gonna put it up here on screen for you to just look at and check. That's the proof. Okay. Some suggestions for a possible solution to this identity crisis is to either give Monk a skill that can be used as a main skill that does chaos damage, or to just give some basic way to convert that chaos, or that just the damage in general, to chaos damage, as was done for that one keystone for fire spells. But don't just make a keystone that does that and call it a day. I shouldn't have to take a keystone just for my ascendancy to work as its base class. It doesn't really make sense. Another issue with Acolyted Chayula is darkness and the way it's implemented currently. I don't think it makes sense thematically or strategically. Why are we using darkness to defend ourselves? It gives an absurd amount of EHP for absolutely no reason. It makes players also get rid of spirit? Wait? Getting rid of spirit is a big ask, even for that amount of EHP. And then, what can I even do with that amount of EHP? Oh, I know. Just tank a lot of hits, but then, what about my damage? So, how about instead of darkness being something we use defensively, how about we use something to make it more of something offensive? People don't go to darkness for defensive protection. They go for it for power. Unlimited power. So, solution 1. Mana is replaced with darkness. Skills that cost mana? Now reserve darkness. This solution can also open up potential tech for use of darkness as a defensive layer for those that want it. Just with a simple change of, if damage taken from mana before life is treated as damage taken reserved as darkness before taken as life. Therefore, it would provide a more reasonable amount of EHP, because before you had darkness, then you had energy shield, and then a player could go mana taken before life, and so it would be then mana, then life. It's just a whole lot for no reason. Solution number 2. Darkness starts fully reserved, but darkness is unreserved proportional to the amount of chaos damage the player deals. When darkness is full, the player can cast a unique skill inspired around a Breach Lord. The skill could be a single skill, only centered around Chayula, or the player could pick one skill out of a set of skills on the Ascendancy node that are based around each Breach Lord. I also have a question regarding Acolyted Chayula. So, into the breach states we are considered to be inside a breach while it is active. Does this have any gameplay significance? Or is this just to explain the effects surrounding the player? If the second one, please make that part of the description hidden, because it confuses me greatly. I have another idea. I get Marauder's not out yet, and I don't want to rush you, but I have an idea. So hear me out. Players take burning damage proportional to stacks of rage, right? And nearby enemies take burning damage proportional to stacks of rage. All I'm saying, man. That would be pretty epic. Okay, so I have some clips that I didn't know where to exactly put for the last of this, so I'm gonna try to be quick with it. Yeah. So there's an issue with the Elephant Tortoise where a hit is procced too soon compared to where the animation is. So you take a hit prior to the animation actually hitting you by several frames. It's like on other enemies, it's a couple frames the animation hits you after the proc hit by the server, but on this it's several frames, and so it just is janky. And plus, like in this clip, I get hit, but I'm way out of the range. Plus, Elephant Tortoise also has 4 separate collision boxes, one for each leg. You can combine those There's no reason why I should be going under the elephant tortoise. I am not on Hoth. I am not fighting the Imperials. I do not need to be under there. So doing poison popcorn actually has an interesting interaction with abysses. So yeah, as you can see, uh, I'm breaking armor and they're dying from plague burst. And yeah, it's or they're dying from poison, and then enemies have their armor broken and whatnot, and then the plague herald goes to the enemies while they're underground, and then as they're coming up, they already have their armor broken, and poison stacks built up, and then they die, and then it's a big chain reaction. It's self-sustaining. This is just my default attack, by the way. This is, yeah, that's what I was doing. Okay, so this is another build I tried. Right now, it currently sucks, but uh, mark my words, when Druid pops into this game, this build will pop off. I tell ya, go bees, have thorns, armor break. You get a minion damage. You get thorns from the tree. It's I tell ya, mark my words, this will be lit. Come, Druid. All right. The bees shall rise. The slippery ice notable has a bug where if the chill wears off while you are rolling, you get a permanent chill debuff applied to your character, and it doesn't display visually or in the numbers or anything. You're just slowed down like you have a chill still applied to you. So the only way to fix it is to reset, like do a force reset, either through logging off or going to town or respawning in some way. Firstly, these logs do not need a collision box, neither do those basket of apples. Secondly, Rolling Assault has an issue that stems from the fact that I believe, at least, that it borrows some code from Shield Charge, the movement aspect specifically. So what happens anytime Rolling Assault runs into a collision box that the player cannot move, it stops the player in its tracks. And the player can't move, readjust, or redirect their trajectory after that. They just stay in place after they hit the collision box with Whirling Assault. And so the only thing you can do is either let the animation play out and the attack finish, or roll out, because if you release the button for Whirling Assault, it doesn't stop the animation, it still continues. And there's also issues I have with the fact that crit and accuracy and everything is rolled on cast. So every hit, it's either all hits crit or none of them crit. So it's so inconsistent because of that. With Faulting Impact, you can engage the enemy and then get stuck where you land. So with the bell, there's an issue where with skills like Ice Strike that jump to the nearest enemy that is at your cursor, the bell does not get priority. So I don't snap to the bell. I reach for the enemy on the other side of the bell. I think that might be, oh, it takes time to fully form or something. Okay, so this last bit is just me showing off some of the collision boxes and the hits with the enemy. I just was playing and just made this clip just to show it off and demonstrate how the collision boxes work. So I'm not going to be voiceovering for this entire part. So I'll just take this the rest of this time, I guess, to say thank you for watching, even though you didn't have to. Uh, I'm sorry this was so long. There was a lot to talk about. What else? Um, I don't plan on making videos regularly, or very much, or maybe not even at all. I don't know. I'll see. But I just wanted to share my thoughts on POE2 and some issues I've had and ways that I think some of the issues could be alleviated. Then again, I mean, I could be just crazy, you know? And there's always that possibility, and I don't know, I'm probably missing something. And I'm probably a big dummy. I tend to be a big dummy. But anyways, yeah. Enjoy the rest of this, I guess.
Bye.